Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm Stefan Spencer, your host, and today we have David Finkel with us. So excited to have him on the show today. He is the co-author of Scale, and he is a Wall Street Journal and Business Week best-selling author of 11 business books. One of them I happen to be holding right here in my hand is The Freedom Formula. Is this your latest one?
It is. It's number 12.
Yeah, number 12. What? That's amazing. You are prolific. David is also the CEO of Maui Mastermind, one of the nation's premier business coaching companies, where he and his coaching team have scaled and sold over $62 billion of businesses. So it's great to have you on the show, David.
Well, I appreciate that, Stefan. I'm glad to be here.
So first of all, I got to know, how can you be so prolific with 12 books? It was harder than heck to get 3 published, and I had co-authors for 2 of them. Like, that's a monumental feat. So how'd you pull that off, and why?
You know, it's interesting. Everyone has their things they love to do. For me, as a kid, I had a manual typewriter. And I still remember an old Royal typewriter, this tan box that had this really satisfying click and snap as you would type the keys. So I've always wanted to do the writing side. And so about every 2-ish years, I get really excited. I've been teaching a body of information to coaching clients and people we work with. And then I step away and think, well, how would I want to say this better? I've been teaching, working on it, workshops, webinars, and then putting it in writing. For me, that's just enjoyable. The first half of the book is painful, but I'm pretty dedicated in that respect. I just set a goal, and twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday, I write 1,500 words per day on each of those days at a minimum, usually closer to 2,000 to 3,000 words. I end up writing about 130 to 150,000 words per book, and then I just edit back all the way back to 60, 65, 70,000 words, and then rewrite it about 5 more times.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness. So I'm in a Facebook group with a bunch of writers, and you should be in that group. There's a bunch of really cool people in there. But one site that I think they should interview if they haven't already is writingroutines.com, where they dig up what the daily habits are of writers, authors, and how they get such a prolific body of work done and not get so distracted by all the daily minutia and all the social media and everything like that. Which incidentally was a topic of one of the past episodes with Nir Eyal, if you know him. He's the author of Indistractable. So let's talk about just business in general, not just about the business of writing.
Sure.
So you are providing coaching, you're providing masterminds, you have presumably gotten a lot of coaching and been a part of other masterminds. So
Sure.
Why kind of hang out your shingle in that regard? And it seems like there are more coaches and masterminds out there that you can shake a stick at.
Sure.
Do we really need another coach? Do we really need another mastermind? But what you have is different with your Maui Mastermind and the coaching that you're offering. Like what makes it a unique selling proposition compared to everything else out there?
Well, I appreciate that. So, I mean, I started off as an athlete. I played field hockey on the U.S. national team and was training toward the Olympics, and I got a tumor in my hip. But so coaching has always been a big part. Playing for semi-professionally overseas, I saw the impact. I mean, here's a crazy thing. My grip was off by 1/4 of an inch on how I held my stick. That 1/4 of an inch changed everything. A guy that was on the New Zealand national team for a number of years was a team captain when I played in London, England, for a club team there. That one little 1/4 of an inch twist turn changed the entire style of how I played. In the business world, I got started. I didn't know much about business at all. I had an early mentor who was, I think we probably in our own ways coached each other. I was one of those people that was always very disciplined, always knew about how to look for efficiencies. And he was someone who knew more about the business side. And we built a coaching business together. At the high point, we were working with about 2,000 coaching clients a year. I sold that in 2005. It was at the end of that. And so Maui Mastermind was something that we'd already been doing, this annual event in Hawaii for our top end clients. And I kept it. I tried retiring for about a month and a half, and I just didn't do well with that. I'm not the person that's not going to do something. And so what do I love to do? I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy learning new things with the bent of how would I put it together, synthesize it, teach it? How would I make it simpler, better? How do I operationalize X or Y? And so over the years, we found our niche, which is helping owner-reliant companies, companies where the owner is at the center and business works, but it only works because they're there making it work. How do you help them both scale and increase its owner independence so that the company has a life beyond just the owner and the owner has a life outside the business? And that's really what we've focused on now for close to 18 years.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a constant problem in businesses where you're the bottleneck as the owner. You're working in the business as much, if not more, than on the business.
Yeah, and you think about the causes for that. I mean, one of the things we wrote about in the Freedom Formula was this idea that there are these two different economic models. One is the time and effort economy, where you get paid for hours, effort, and perhaps a little bit attitude. Then you have the value economy, which says, I'm not getting paid for hours and effort. I need hours, I need some effort, but I'm getting paid for value that I'm creating economically. The best entrepreneurs, the best business executives, they all know that truly they're on the payroll for some particular purpose. And what holds us back, one of the things, we talk about the 5 chains that hold you back, but one of them is what I call control itis. It's the inflammation of your control gland. It's the business owner who's so scared and so tightly gripping on. And I get it. I mean, we've all had experiences. Stefan, you've had experiences where you've handed something off and the person you handed it to didn't do it the way you wanted or when you wanted it. And so what happens is we generalize that out. If you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. And unfortunately, that constrains a business, and it's absolutely the wrong lesson to learn. The lesson to learn should be, how do I hand off more effectively? How do I make sure that I've hired and onboarded the right people? How do I have the right internal systems and controls so we can make sure of that? Not, do it all myself. That's a real danger point.
Well, the problem was in delegating the task instead of delegating the outcome.
Yes, the functional responsibility for something versus, do it this way, come back, and I'll tell you what you should think and do next. But a lot of the people we initially work with, and I'm a recovering control freak. I will be the first to say it. My wife will be the second to say it, although she might not call me a recovering control freak, but she'll say something similar. But the point is that so many of us are, and we have to learn to be more comfortable with not being in control. Yeah. And that's a tough one for business people.
Well, the more you're trying to control, the less influence you have. And the less you control, the more influence you have.
Absolutely true. It's funny. A friend of mine who I wrote a book with, this is probably, I think it was like Build a Business, Not a Job. I had to think which one it was. Her name's Stephanie. She's a phenomenal mentor. She's, successful marriage for 50 plus years, raised 2 kids, built $100+ million of companies, former chairperson of the National Association of Manufacturers. But she challenged me before. She had me write on an index card. So she said, David, pull out an index card, and I did. And she said, write this question down. And the next time someone in your team comes to you and says, what should I do here, David? You read the index card and remember me. And she made me write down, I don't know. What do you think we should do here? Mm-hmm. And then about a year later, I flipped the card over and wrote down, if I wasn't here, what would you do? And I started asking those questions fanatically when people brought me things. And what happened is the easy stuff started disappearing. They just handled it. But the tougher stuff would still filter to me, but I could coach them to handle it themselves so that we would grow their capability, not just me giving them the reflexive answer. And I don't know about you, Stefan, I like having the answer. I mean, it feels good, and I like my ideas. My ideas are good, I think. It's a little obnoxious to say, but learning to let go and letting other people do it differently, letting them, when the stakes are low, do it perhaps even wrong. Not when the stakes are high, but when the stakes are low, doing that over time, it's really transformed for myself and for all the client businesses. I observe them doing the same thing. So It's kind of a fun dynamic.
Well, and to not do that, you become pointy-haired boss from Dilbert, if you're familiar with that guy.
Yes.
And
totally.
We don't want to be that. We don't want to be pointy-haired boss. And the epitome of that micromanagement is one comic I remember from Dilbert. He's at the computer. Dilbert is working at his computer. He's got his hand on the mouse, and pointy-haired boss has his hand on Dilbert's hand on the mouse.
Controlling him.
Yes.
Micromanagement. I love it. The shadow. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. So we don't want to be that kind of micromanager.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned something I really wanted to latch onto, and I love this concept from Stephanie, that you have this index card. I don't know. What do you think? What a powerful question or positioning is, first of all, to admit you don't have all the answers, and then secondly, to put it back in their court with a question, a powerful question, an open-ended question. And another example of one of those kinds of questions that you could ask of people that report to you, people who are colleagues or your boss or friends, family, loved ones, is, what did I not ask you that I should have?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
That's a great one here.
Yeah.
What should we be asking that we're afraid to ask right now, or we've
Ooh,
been
I like
scared
that
to ask
too.
or avoiding? That's great. I love these. I actually have I bought on Amazon a laminating machine for myself because I have several of these cards that I kind of rotate through. And one of them that I've really been enjoying was that question about what is the question we've been afraid to ask. We've been delaying or putting off or that, but I like what you're saying. What should I have asked? That's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then this concept of having an index card, what about having a Post-it note, right? And that Post-it note might have something on there that's a reminder to just stay the course, or be more intentional, or have a bigger viewpoint, like see the bigger picture,
Yeah.
have a more open-minded stance about things, or be more, yeah, just meta about things, right? Thinking about your thinking,
Yeah.
right? So one
I,
example of that, I learned this from James Schramko, is to have a Post-it note on your computer that said, "Would Richard Branson be doing this?"
that is great. That's calling you to a pretty high standard. I love that.
Yeah.
You know, that type of awareness. I always like to find simple, easy ways to get things to be clearer. And a friend of mine who actually wrote about the story in the book, he gave me another one that I put on a card, which was can't do, won't do, don't know how. And it was a really good way of framing it, especially when I'm working with someone on my staff that has not managed before. So they have someone that they're managing, and that person gives them a challenge. Before I make up all the stories that all of us do, I ask myself, is it that they can't do it, that they won't do it, or they don't know how? And just by pausing and asking that, obviously we treat the can't do versus the won't do very differently, and the don't know how is a training issue. And so I found that was another one that would probably fit well in a Post-it note or an index card.
I like that. Yeah. Well, speaking of giving the team a challenge, what about giving the team a challenge that is kind of maybe not so much a test, but just yeah, maybe a test of their character, and to see how kind of managerial or leadership oriented they are, or if they're just a clock puncher. I'm in the midst of doing this right now with my team. So they have a challenge that they need to imagine themselves as me, as the owner of the business. What would you do in this situation? So, and I laid out the situation, that this is a real situation that we're in. So what would you do? If you were in my shoes, what would you do? And I'm waiting to get all the responses back. Some people are putting quite a lot of thought into it and writing up a big old Word document or Google Doc.
Yeah.
And some are probably just going to riff, not having prepared at all. And who knows? We'll see. But it's an interesting exercise, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, and maybe how I could up my challenge-giving game.
Yeah. So, Stefan, I would go one step back. So one of the things I've learned is that there's a really useful distinction in a company between what I'll call a grow player and a role player. And understanding this will save you so much frustration. So a role player is someone who says, you know what, Stefan, I just want to do a good job. I just want to do my job and be done. Don't put me in new situations. Don't try to challenge me. Just let me do what I do well and stay out of my way. A grow player says, you know what, I want to do a great job. But if I'm not challenged, if I'm not growing, then there's something I'm missing. And the frustration people have, Stefan, is they try to manage a role player and a grow player the same way, or to push a role player to grow. We've got a client of ours. Her name's Lana. She runs a law firm, very successful practice. She's got a guy who works for her who is very good, but he's a role player. been with her probably over a decade. And she was talking with me at one of our conferences. She said, well, I want this guy to grow. I said, well, Lana, does he want to grow? No, but he's so much better than this. I said, would you like him to quit? She says, well, of course not. I said, well, then stop asking him to grow. He doesn't want to grow. And so if I can make that distinction, now that I know that, first of all, it's not what they say, because everyone says out loud, I want to be a grow player, because it's the polite thing to say, or the respectful thing. They'd like it to believe it to be true.
It's the politically correct version.
But there's two tests to tell if they're a grow player. Number one, how do they receive feedback? A role player almost always will defend or minimize or push away, come up with all the rational reasons. A grow player will say, you know what, I hadn't thought of that. Thank you. I can see that I can do this better. And you'll see them take that in. The second thing is you watch, are they actively going out of their way to learn and take on uncomfortable situations? So your challenge will help you see some of that. But going back to it, if I have a role player, I want to be very much coaching them or managing them for a result. Joni, will you do X by this date in this manner, and then close the loop and let me know you've done? Can you do that? Great. A grow player, I'm going to say, Carol, I'm thinking we need to do something here for this purpose. If it was you and it was your project, how would you approach that? Tell me why. If you couldn't do that, then what would you do? Is there something better about the second choice that you would bring into the first? What would be your first step? Is there any missing information? Wow, hearing all that, Carol, I think you're on the right track. I can't wait to see what you do with this. How frequently do you think I should be updated about it? Right? I ask questions and I coach for development. So not only do I get the result, but I get the growth in Carol so she has more capacity or capability in parallel. So I think that's what I would share. Asking the question was a great start, but I would tell anyone listening to this, if I'm managing a team, I should go through person by person and just define or try to get a clear understanding, grow versus role. And most will be obvious, but probably 10 or 20% won't be. And those are the ones I put little mini challenges on to see which way they go. I watch what they do when I give them feedback. It's just so revealing, and it's so obvious when you look for that distinction.
Yeah. Well, in that hypothetical person, what was her name? Janie or something like that?
Joni, use. I hope there wasn't a Joni I've offended there by saying a grow player. By the way, we want grow players. We do. And we want role players. Role players who are good are essential. But that said, go on here, Steph.
Okay. So Joni's, the way that you managed her, hypothetically here, was almost like you made it her idea by coaxing out, like, what would you do next? And how often do you think I should be updated? It's like you made it her idea to update you and to do it this often, or to get you this particular outcome, or hit these certain milestones. And I love that, because then they take ownership. It's just brilliant psychology.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, good coaching, good management are just some simple fundamentals. And I think of anything that 24 years of coaching other people in business and another 8 years making part of my partial living coaching athletes, you learn that, some people need the direct, hey, you need to do this by this date, by this time. But people who want to grow, if I direct them too much, what happens is I lose all that growth with it. I lose that second meta layer by me role modeling with them how that they can become better for them to manage the next generation of leaders. What a shame that would be.
Right. Makes total sense. Okay. So somebody is a grow player, which sounds like they like getting outside their comfort zone. And that's good, because we want people who are comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's how we get the performance out of them. That's how we get them to just crush it for us and for themselves. But the role player sounds like kind of a clock puncher, and there's these different modalities or different frameworks, and the clock puncher is one of the terms that Aaron Ross has in his book From Impossible to Inevitable. I had him on the show, and it was a great episode. And so I'm curious, of all the different modalities and frameworks that are out there, there's like EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. I just had Gino Wickman on this podcast. In fact, that's how I got to
He introduced
find you.
us.
Yes,
That's right.
he introduced us. That's right.
That's right.
So there's his framework. There's the E-Myth, the entrepreneurial myth, and the framework involved with that, and kind of doing a skunk work sort of situation rather than reinventing the existing business. You start a new one on the side. So that's Michael Gerber. I've had him on the podcast. There's also different personality assessments and ways of analyzing what kind of fit the person is, whether it's Kolbe or it's print or, there's just so many of them. Predictive Index, Strengthsfinder, Myers-Briggs, DISC. So there's lots of ways to ascertain the person, and there's lots of ways to figure out what the roles are and this, the kind of the seats on the bus and who should be in what seats and in what ways. So I'm curious, what are your favorites? Because you're certainly a subject matter expert, having, 24 years of experience of coaching. So you must have glommed onto certain frameworks more than others and certain types of assessments more than others. Which ones are your favorites and why?
Great question. I'm going to go back to something here, which is the role player. A good role player is worth his or her weight in gold. I mean, you need them. They're not a clock puncher. They're the person who will diligently grind out a result, and you can count on it. But just let them do what they like to do. Don't make them do something they're uncomfortable with. Let them do the same thing for 20 years for their career, and they're happy, which would drive me insane, and obviously would drive you. Obviously, you and I would be bouncing off the walls after 2 years after a year probably.
Oh, 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
There we go. Okay, so going back to Kolbe. So I enjoy Kolbe, Kolbe,
right,
which is a personality assessment. And so there they have their fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. That's been one that's been useful. I found that the distinction for me that was most helpful there was recognizing that when I've looked for assistance, so one of the things we talked about in the Freedom Board was how to find and leverage an assistant. Well, early on, I went through a lot of assistants where it clearly was the wrong fit. And what I realized was their level of quick start was really important. So in a Kolbe, you have the 3/3, right? The early tranche, that would be a very low 1 to 3. Then you have the 4 to 6, and then you have the 7 to 9. I don't know if anyone's ever been a 10 on a Kolbe for a score or not, but what I found is I'm a very high quick start, 8 or 9 depending when I take the test. Mm-hmm. If I have an assistant, and quick start is my comfort with ambiguity, if I have an assistant who is a 1, 2, or a 3, it will not work. These are assistants that are really too anxious for me to be around, not because of them, but that doesn't fit for my personality.
So I've 1, 2, or 3 in quick start.
Right. So when I look at quick start, you'd think, oh, I want a great assistant. I want attention to detail, great follow through. I want someone who can get stuff done themselves, an implementer. But what I've learned for me on the assistant side, I need someone who's somewhere in the 4 to 6 range of a quick start. This is someone who's comfortable with ambiguity, but doesn't crave novelty. And that's important because a lot of the things my assistant does, I have to carve out for them. I'll leave them a quick audio message through an app, and I'll just kind of sketch it out, and they have to figure it out. Well, back when I used to have some people who had very low quick start, that was very anxiety provoking for them, and I didn't like managing that for them. I didn't at all. If they're too high, then I get another me, and that's clearly a bad situation. One of me is plenty.
Yeah.
And so that's
the next thing you know, they'd be starting a business. Like, what? I just trained you on everything. I know, that was so valuable. Thank you. I just started 2 businesses last weekend.
That's right. So going back, I've enjoyed Kolbe. I mean, I have not found anyone that has been so perfect in any way. I find that they're good for flags, to teach me something about a piece of human behavior, like the quick start part. It never would have occurred to me that there's a way to think about somebody with how comfortable or fluent are they with handling ambiguity. That's a good one for me to know. Or implementer on that scale is about how much I want to be getting in there and doing something tangible, concrete with my hands. Well, that to me is foreign. And most times for the assistants, I don't want someone who, I have to be careful. So I've got 2 assistants now. Tiffany is actually, I can tell, even though I didn't make her do the Kolbe, she is actually quite high on the implementer. Very clear. She likes to get stuff done. Emily, and she's local to me, and I get about 15 hours a week from her. Emily, who's far away, about 8 hours drive, she does about another 30 hours with me each week, and both of them are phenomenal and world class as a team. She is not nearly as high on the implementer, but she's got really, really good follow through, and she's probably, if I were to guess, a 5 or a 6 on the quick start. She can say, "Yeah, I got it, David. I'll figure that one out." Whereas I've had other assistants, they'd say, "Well, hang on, what about this?" And "Oh gosh, what about that?" And you could see the nervousness come off of them in waves of anxiety, which, ugh, don't like to be around that.
Well, that also I think could be exposed through having them do the print assessment, a print survey. Are you familiar with print?
I'm not. Tell me about this.
Oh, I love this one. I just interviewed the co-founder of Print, the co-creator of it, Deborah Levine.
Okay.
So the idea behind this is that we have these unconscious motivators, and listeners, you're going to have an opportunity to listen to that episode, and so you can get it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And I'm going to not do this nearly the justice that it deserves because it's an incredible assessment. But the unconscious motivators are like the part of the iceberg that's under the surface that you can't see, but it's the majority of the iceberg. The unconscious motivators drive us to do what we do, and we just don't know about it. It's kind of running in the background. It's our reptilian brain or our mammalian brain that's kind of driving the bus. So if we can understand what those unconscious motivators are, and with this assessment, there's two, there's a primary and there's a secondary, or a major or a minor, then you can figure out what triggers people to go into their shadow self instead of staying in their best self. And it sounds like when somebody gets all freaked out, like, I don't know what to do, I don't feel comfortable here, that sounds like you've hit one of their triggers, which has an underlying unconscious motivator that they want to be perfect. They want it to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, then the wheels come off the bus. It's just it's a mess.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's another, I don't remember the name of it, but there's another assessment that would put that person in what I would call a relator. And what they care about is their greatest fear is the fear of embarrassment, of being caught in a situation where they weren't prepared for, or they look bad in, or they feel out of sorts. And what you're saying rings true for me. I actually wrote that down. Thank you. That's one I'm going to check out more.
Yeah. So I heard about that from Strategic Coach, which I'm part of. So that's Dan Sullivan's program, which has been great. And I really enjoyed that print assessment. And then to interview Deborah was, just phenomenal. So you don't remember what that related, like the assessment that was, has the relator type?
I don't remember the night, but the 60-second version, it's pretty interesting. You look at two different axes. One axis is how direct or indirect are you? Are you more process oriented, indirect, or more goal oriented to the end result? And then the second question is how open or self-contained you are. If I'm open, that means how much do I look for other people to make my decisions? And if I'm self-contained, I do it myself. So if somebody who is direct and self-contained, we call this person a director. What they fear is loss of control. What they desire most is a result. What they really get annoyed by is wasting of time. Just give me the bottom line. They want short, fast, quick, and easy. Prototypical business leader, the lion type of person. That's the personality. Somebody who is direct, but is very is indirect, process oriented, but very self-contained as a thinking style. This is the prototypical engineer. You know what? They want to be complimented on their thinking process. They hate being rushed. They fear being rushed in their process. They don't like to go fast. They figure if I check all the boxes, I'll get to my decision. I don't need anyone else's input, but I need to go through my process, whatever this algorithm I'm using for this. Someone who's indirect and very much open. They're influenced by their people as that relator. They fear embarrassment. They desire most is what they desire is connection. Great number two person in a lot of respects in terms of a support player. Many of my best assistants have been relators. They just would move heaven and earth to help care for somebody else. And then you have what I think this model would call a socializer, very much direct person, but very open. What that means is they're very much influenced by other people. They want fun. They're looking for novelty. They're the life of the party. And so this person fears routine. They fear boredom. This person is motivated by a sense of status. So that's an example of another one that again, I think there are elements that are helpful. And I always look for, when you mentioned drives, the drives that people are really craving and the things that they fear. And I think both those things are important. And then what frustrates the heck out of them, what comforts them. Those are 4 elements that I always look for in whatever assessment I'm looking for to better understand somebody else. They're the shortcuts to better get along with somebody.
Gotcha. Is that Dr. Tony Alessandra's work?
So he was one of the people I've heard that through, but I've also heard Gary Chapman's use that same model, although he turns it back to animals, otters and golden retrievers.
All right.
But I don't know who created it, so I don't know who to give credit. I've actually heard 4 different people use the same model, but I don't know who created it. If you know, I would love to be able to give credit for whoever created it. It's a useful shortcut for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, very cool. And so there's different ways of analyzing a person's behavior and their kind of patterns and their ability to pattern recognize and so forth. There are also ways of analyzing how the world sees them instead of how they see the world. That's how Sally Hogshead does it, for example, with her Fascinate archetypes. So she's got a primary and a secondary strategy. I'm not sure if it's strategy is the right word, but anyways, this is like they're strong and they're second strong, or they're weak, secondary feature or whatever, and then they're on this this grid as being a particular archetype. And I found that really interesting too. I took that assessment and I agree with it as far as how it assessed me and how the world sees me. That was pretty cool. Strengthsfinder is one of my favorites. It's from Clifton and the people who do the what are the polls that they do? Gallup polls. Thank you. There's also DISC, which I quite like. So the DISC assessment helps me to see if somebody is very detail-oriented, if they have high C. For caution, that's a good sign because I'm looking for somebody as like an assistant who would be very detail-oriented and not somebody that's super domineering like I am. So if I have a high D and they have a high D, we're going to probably bump heads. But if they also, I'm a 9 quick start, by the way. So I am all over the place, starting fires, creating things, all like constantly, like from one thing to the next. Like, oh, shiny object, squirrel, like all the time. I'm prolific.
So are you
with
currently
ideas.
right now, Stefan, looking for an assistant? So not that but if is that the case? I'm just curious.
I'm always looking for assistants. Yes, because even though I have some fantastic assistants, what I'm missing most of all in the business, I think, is the integrator, if you're familiar with that concept from EOS. So I don't have that second in command sort of operations person. Apparently, there's only 1% of the population that are integrators. 5% of us are entrepreneurs, but that's still pretty rare. But rarer than hen's teeth are the integrators, and I really need one. So I have this problem that you described earlier of being in the business, working in the business as much, if not more, than I'm working on the business, and I'm stuck operationally, kind of juggling everything and making sure everything keeps moving. I'm owner-centered, to use your terminology.
So if I were coaching you, I'm going to challenge you in a few things, and this is healthy. This is what a coach's job is, to be from the outside giving you some perspectives that you can't see for yourself. Not that I'm right, not that I'm wrong, not that you're right, not that you're wrong. So this is good. We're going to role play this for everybody.
I love it. Let's do it.
All right. So most people, I think, look for the knight in shining armor on a white horse, whether this is a male knight or a female knight, doesn't matter. So they look for the integrator. And the problem with that is to find that one person. Number one, most businesses aren't to a point where they can handle that. And so generally as a strategy, that's not a great strategy, has been my experiences. Instead, here's what I would coach someone to do.
Okay.
If I find that great person, what happens is I move the reliance from my shoulders onto his or her shoulders. Now I have an integrator reliant company, and that's not what I'm looking for. It's improved over now I have 2 shoulders, but instead the way I would coach a client is we think about each business has 5 pillars, right? You have sales, marketing, operations, finance, HR or team, and then executive leadership. So if I can think about it as a smaller move, I don't need to find someone to be my number two for all the pillars. Instead, I need to say, depending where I are, there are three levels to every business. There's the level one, level two, level three. Level one is the pure startup, just getting ready to launch. Level two is that owner-reliant company, has three stages to that. Early stage level two, which is now I'm trying to reach the point of profitability, where I'm consistently making a profit, where I've reached the point of sustainability. Middle stage level two is a business that functionally works well. It's profitable, it's sustainable, but it only works because the owner is right there at the center. All the key decisions come back to the owner. All the key client interactions come back to the owner.
That's me.
Okay.
That's my
Advanced stage level two is when you start having two or more of these pillars being owned functionally by someone else. And then level three is an exit stage company. You can scale it, sell it, or transition to passive. So let's go back to most of who we work with is that middle or advanced stage level two. So let's come back here. Looking for an integrator at your level, two things have become really challenging. Number one, it's a high risk move. You're putting all this on one person. If they don't work out, there's a lot of mess to clean up with, a lot of disruption, and it's a fairly expensive hire to find someone who really is capable across the way. It's the equivalent in rock climbing of what I call going radical. You're going to have to let go of what you're currently holding on to get there. It's a risky move. A more higher odds move is to say, okay, how can I start to incrementally replace myself in areas of my business through the current team that I have, better systems in there, and or perhaps a hire for a pillar of that. So for me, a key, since I'm probably more of a sales marketing bent, and obviously for your business, you're going to be more of the marketing, creation, executive leadership. You might need that operations person, but I'm not going to look for them to be. I'm not going to look to make a COO hire who's over everything. I'm going to look for a manager for that pillar of the company. If I have the current people I can grow into it, great. If I don't, it's a much easier move to find one of the pillars. And then when I have one of those pillars that are 80 to 90% reliant on somebody else doing that versus me, that gives me both the courage and likely the cash flow to take on and tackle another pillar. And then from there, I'll have the courage and the cash flow and the experience to tackle the next. And if I do that over the course of 24 to 60 months, 2 to 5 years is what we typically see. Now I can be at either a advanced stage level 2 or a level 3 business that truly is independent of me, the owner. But that's how we would progress it. So if you were a client, that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, that's good advice. I really like that. And that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. If I do see somebody who I think could be a really good integrator, and I did interview somebody earlier this year, right before the pandemic really got into full swing, and I didn't push the button on that. I didn't take that leap, and in retrospect, thank goodness, because that would have been a very expensive hire, 6-figure salary plus bonuses, right? And we're in a very difficult time right now, very kind of on the precipice sort of time for many businesses. I'm not at risk of going out of business, but I couldn't afford that level of person right now. So I'd be hiring him and then I'd be letting him go. That would suck.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it not only would it hurt from the cash flow perspective, but once you bring him in the mix with them touching everything, if you haven't made the right hire or you haven't brought them on the right way, what happens is they disrupt everything versus if you have a pillar leader, you've contained them to a degree in one of 5 or more pillars of the company. That's been my experiences. I found a little bit more of a conservative tact while it goes slower, and we all would like to just be able to turn over and hand everything to Sally. That's not necessarily been the strategy I found as the winning move on most cases. If I were an advanced stage level 2 and I already had pillar leaders to find a COO, I probably have the cash flow, I have the infrastructure, I have people that are there to backstop this person, all the right elements that makes an integrator hire a COO hire much more likely to be successful. But I don't have that at a middle stage level 2.
Interesting. So you asked me the question, am I looking for an assistant? So I have some great team members, and assistants are included in that mix. I don't manage my own email for the most part, for example. And but I want somebody as an assistant who is super detail oriented and is able to keep track of all those details. So
It's interesting.
so like an
They're
EA, essentially, an executive assistant, not just a VA.
Yeah. I mean, you think about this is funny. The most popular article I ever wrote for Inc., and I don't know why it struck a chord, but it's on this subject, was on the 4 levels of assistance. And I mean, even to this day, I probably have 100,000 to 150,000 people read that article every year. Here we are 3 or 4 years later. I have no idea why it struck such a chord. But you have
I'm
a
going to
gopher.
read that, by the way. That sounds like a
Okay.
great article, and I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode.
Okay, there we go. And I love how you do the checklist, by the way, from that part. I've been on a lot of podcasts, and you're the only one that I'm aware of that's ever given me a summary of every podcast so I can kind of look at what it is and sample it before I spend the hour listening to it, which I thought absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So you have a gopher, right? Do this, do that. No one wants a gopher. You have an assistant that can do discrete, defined tasks, but you better define what they are. That's your VA. Then you have an executive assistant who can handle administratively pretty much any administrative function, even if it's not clean and clear. They can handle ambiguity, but don't take them out of administrative things. Don't make an executive assistant do a negotiation on a sales thing. Don't make them step into figuring out a vendor contract. You got to be careful. They're comfortable, but only to a point. And then you'll have what I call a chief of staff, or I think that's probably the easiest way of putting it. This is somebody who knows the purpose that you're trying to accomplish and can handle like your own personal COO. Very few people that run companies that are under $50 million will ever have that level of assistant, because when you do, they literally will be your COO. And I know it because Teresa, who works for me, started off 12 years ago now. Wow. She was my assistant, and she now is our company COO. Now, if I were running a multi-billion-dollar company, I probably could have kept her as my personal chief of staff or my personal COO, but she was way too talented to stay in that role for me. It was too much of a colossal waste of talent for her staying in that role. So for most of us, like you said, that executive assistant, that's the level we're probably going to go for. Someone who can handle ambiguity, someone who can handle the administrative part of what we do better than us, cleaner than us. Hey, reminder, remember, Stefan, you're supposed to be on there with David in 5 minutes. Get off that, get over here. And that is wonderful when you find that person. Someone who's got the grace to not be obnoxious, but the backbone to challenge you when need be. Somebody who's willing to say, you know what, I've got that, and you've seen over time that they truly do. I'm curious for you. One thing I made a mistake on in the assistants is I used to focus on too much on what I'm looking for. And what I've learned in the last probably 8 to 10 years is I need to get clear on my own needs first in terms of my personality styles. So I'm an auditory delegator. So I want somebody who's comfortable with me giving messages to. I'm pretty much an introvert. So I don't want somebody who's going to feel like I'm ignoring them by not having personal chit chat. I don't want anyone to send me an audio message. It would drive me crazy. I want them to put it in an email so I can read it much faster. I want one long email that's numbered versus 10 different emails. I want an email with 10 things in it. It's easier to handle. But everyone's different from that. Are you an auditory delegator or a text delegator or a meet with me delegator? How do you like to delegate?
Meet with me. Yeah.
Meet with me. Okay. Do you have them record when they meet with you?
Yes.
Great. Okay. And when they give you information, do you prefer them to wait to the meeting and give it to you then, or would you rather have a written summary, or you want the big detail? How would you prefer that?
I like it organized and put into Asana, and a reminder in an email that links to that Asana board, instead of them assuming that I'm going to go into Asana and see if they've updated it. And I don't want it all just as the
bottom line
vomited into an email thread. I want the bottom line, and I want to be directed to something that's nicely, tidily organized.
Got it. So knowing that about yourself, number one, you'll hire better, but number two, your hiring process is when you actually start onboarding somebody. In that hiring process, they're going to get a sense, while they're trying to be still convincing you that they're the right person, they're going to get a sense for what part of the onboard is. This is what I'm looking for. And it's interesting. you both inoculate them from the darker parts of you. Like, for example, for my assistants, I often will make a joke, look, there might be weeks that we actually don't have a conversation. And if that would be something that you would feel, oh no, is David mad? Then we have the wrong fit, right? So we can inoculate against our shadows, but we can also say, this is a chance for us to start the training before they ever start. So I love what you're doing there with your Asana. You know yourself very well. I want the email. Don't make me look at the app. Prompt me to go back over there. Don't give me a blur. Give me very structured information. That's great. You're going to make a good hire because you know yourself so well.
Yeah, awesome. So clearly you've gotten some great mentors and coaches for yourself over the years. This is fabulous. That's not just all from reading articles and
Sure.
books, I'm sure. So who have been some of the standout coaches and mentors that you've worked with over the years, and why?
Okay, so I've mentioned Stephanie, and I think probably her biggest impact was somebody who has just a tremendous whole life success. That was very important to me. I've got a friend of mine, his name's Kieran, who is a very successful man, a client of ours as well. But really over the years, I've always looked for mentors who have more than just a business success. I can watch someone in the business world and I'll pick up good stuff, and I can ignore that all of us have feet of clay and all of us have parts of us that aren't necessarily pretty. But I've always resonated with people who have a certain value where, like, for example, let me share it this way. Stephanie gave me 3 questions that she uses to make good business decisions and life choices. Before she makes the final choice, she says, what's most important, for the sake of what, and how much is enough? And she shared those questions with me when I was in my 37, 38 years old, right before I had my kids. A time in my life, I'm 49 now, a time in my life where I was thinking I was going to, I wanted to be the billion-dollar company builder, and I didn't really think about what did I value most. I'd already kind of achieved what I recognized in the past that I was what I really wanted, but I was about to just ignore and have no gratitude for it, and this pursuit of filling up the part of me that felt empty.
Yeah, and at what cost too? So you build a billion-dollar business and you end up divorced because of what you had to give up.
Right. And I'm not saying I have to give up to do that, because people who've done it before have been able to keep wonderful relationships. But for me, she has been a great prompt or reminder about whole life success. So that's always where I've gravitated, the people I've wanted to spend time with. I would consider one of my business mentors, Jeff Hoffman, who I wrote Scale with, one of the founding team members of Priceline. But I'm really good about pulling and modeling and taking out pieces from people where I don't have to take the whole of them, because there aren't a ton of people whose lives are lived in such a way that I would want to emulate their whole life. When I find them, those are the people I love to keep those relationships for decades. But the others, I'll pick out an interesting choice that they've made, that I can use in my business life, and ignore or let go of the other part. But the people who've made the biggest impact on mentors, like the Jeffs, the Kierans, the Stephanies, these are people that have a life that I actually admire, a value structure that resonates for me. Not that they're the right values, but they're closer to what my values are.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of Jeff, I remember, I didn't read your entire book here, The Freedom Formula, but I read part of it, and you had a really nice story about Jeff in there, about how he was checking in on the team, like, how can I help speed up this project, or anything I can do to contribute? And somebody kind of in a flippant way said, yeah, you could pick up my dry cleaning. And so he said, give me the ticket, I'll do it. Instead of like verbally berating the guy for being cheeky, no, whatever it takes to help keep this team on task, working on what's important and not distracted by the trivial stuff, I'll do it.
That was his first startup, by the way. He sold it for $20 million. And what a great lesson, right? Exactly. The price of getting someone's dry cleaning, to show everyone in that room who was his programming team that were working on their next release under a tight deadline of a travel software program. It's like, yeah, the most important thing for me to do is to keep you producing in this room. You need food? I'll get it. You need dry cleaning? I'll get it. And
it's so humble too. That I love the humility of it.
Yeah. Well, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's got his head on straight. That's for sure.
Yeah, amazing. Now, one thing that occurred to me is this idea of understanding what makes somebody tick from a values perspective and bringing that person on board because they resonate or somehow integrate well with your value system and the team's values and culture and all that requires doing some sort of determination process to see what their values hierarchy is. And there's one I learned about that's actually free to take on Dr. DeMartini's website, Dr. John DeMartini, who is also a guest on this podcast. Amazing guy. He's been on The Secret and, just an incredible guy. So on the Dr. DeMartini website, there's a free process called the values determination process. And it figures out what your hierarchy of values are. And so if somebody's on your payroll or as a contractor and they are misaligned in terms of their highest values and their job roles and the job description and so forth, there's no strong connection between their values, their highest values, and what they're doing for you, they're probably not going to be there for long, or they're going to do a lousy job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things that was always a challenge for me was to remember to celebrate progress. I think a lot of people who are fairly motivated by achievement, we think, I still have more to do. I still have further to go. And I had a team member of mine, his name was Steven. What was it? Probably almost 12 years ago now. He challenged me on it. He said, David, everyone comes to you and they say, here's what I've done. And you're like the parent who can never be pleased. You always say, great job. And, I don't say, but I was way too, finesse him to say that.
Yeah.
But his comment really, really struck me. And we use a tool in our company called a Big Rock Report. It's a web-based app that we have for our team uses it, clients use it. But what it does at the beginning of each week, I pick my 1 or 2 big rocks for the week. And at the end of the week, I close the loop on the big rock, share my victories, my challenges, and the other updates. But when I see the victories, I print this 1-page report for each of my 6 direct reports every week on Monday. And when I see that Kim did this or Teresa did that, it prompts me to celebrate their progress. And I think what really I would tell to anyone on here, the fear is, if I do that, then they won't be motivated, or I just don't think to do that. But here's the part. If I don't give myself permission to feel the progress that our company is making, then I'm not allowing my team to have permission. I don't realize it, but I'm not being an inspiring leader. So what I found for me is I actually started probably about 4 years ago journaling. I don't do it every day, but probably 3 or 4 days a week. It's actually back. You can see on the screen here. I pull out a journal and I write down what are the steps I took toward my goals, in the last day or two since I wrote, things I'm grateful for, magic moments. And as I start to pay more attention to that, number one, I enjoy my business a lot more. Number two, I'm much more willing and ready to celebrate successes of other staff members. And number three, as I do that, my team enjoys it more. I retain people longer. We do better work. So just a thought for people.
Oh, that's great. So that's called the Big Rocks tool?
The Big Rock Report. We call it the Big Rock Report. Yeah, based off of, I think originally Big Rock as a concept came from Stephen Covey, but we operationalized it into a simple web-based app. But someone could do the same thing themselves, right? The structure is pick your 1 or 2 big rocks at the beginning of the week for the coming week. A big rock is something you're doing that creates the most value that week for the business or your function in it, and it has to take less than 2 hours. If it takes more than 2 hours, make it a smaller big rock. It's too much. No one's going to get more than 2 hours regularly uninterrupted time. At the end of the week, close the loop. How did it go? What were your victories, your challenges, and the other updates you'd want to share? And then we as a leadership team in my company share that amongst ourselves, and I get to see, what did Teresa, our CEO, think was most important? How did she do on that? Did she have victories? What is she struggling with that I could help her with? Or at least acknowledge that I know she's dealing with that in the business. And so looking at that person by person, it makes managing my staff much easier because I don't want their whole to-do list, and I doubt you would either. It's overwhelming. I don't want to see the 74 things she did this week. I want to see the 2 or 3 things she did that were most important. I want to hear the highlights that were great, the highlights that were challenges, and the other 5 or 10 updates she wants to share that aren't in our project management tool. And it forces me at the end of the week to stop and think, what did I actually get accomplished? And then I pick my big rocks for the coming week. It's a really good focusing tool.
Oh, that's great. That is so good. Do you have a template or an example that I could share in the show notes?
You absolutely do. Actually, in the Freedom Formula, there's a I don't know, hang on. As you're talking, I will tell you the exact page in the Freedom Formula. That's how funny it is. Yet you keep talking for a moment, and I'll get
Okay.
that for you here.
Okay.
And if I
So
can't, but it's in here in chapter 3, I believe it was of the book. But
okay,
there's
so
an
I have
actual
the
copy. Here
book,
we go.
but for our listener who doesn't have the book, would they be able to see an example of the Big Rock Report?
Absolutely. So if you want to give them an example in your show notes, it was page 103. You have my permission, or my publisher might kill me, but you have my permission, so I'll be the one in trouble. You can grab a clip of that and put it in the show notes if you want to show people.
Okay.
If someone actually wants to I believe there's we have, as part of the book, we did a special website
Yeah.
called freedomtoolkit.com. And on there, I actually believe you can download not just that, but our sweet spot tool, 4 or 5 hours of video-based training. And I'm pretty sure the Big Rock Report is on there. But if not, you'll put it in the show notes, and then my
Yeah.
publisher will yell at me.
So this Freedom Toolkit, which I saw is at the back of the book,
Sure.
it's a really nice appendix here. It gets people excited to take that next step and get all these free tools and resources. So is that something that somebody who hasn't read the book can still take advantage of?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's the thing. So I mentioned I write about 120 to 160,000 words for a book, and then I have to get rid of half of it. It breaks my heart. I have to, because it's too long. No one's going to read a 1,200-page book for business. So all that stuff, what we did is
I can
turned
relate
it into,
to that. I have a 1,000-page book, The Art of SEO, and it doesn't
Oh
sell
my
nearly
gosh.
as well as this previous edition, which had like 250 fewer pages. Our publisher was not happy about
I
that.
love it. We don't want the art of SEO. We want the executive briefing on SEO, right? We just give me
Exactly.
the answer. I don't want to have to learn this stuff. Just tell me the 6 things I can do to transform my business. I love it. But I put it into video and PDF tools just because I'm a little anal retentive. I have always wanted to be the person that doesn't say, here's what you do, but I've always wanted to be the person who says, and here's exactly how you do the what to do. So my publisher was fine. As long as I cut the words, they let me put as much on the website as I wanted. And so that's someone who's got the book can get it there. Someone who doesn't have the book can still get the toolkit, although my hope would be,
Get the book
if they've
too.
gotten if they've gotten great value, then get the book. Because I will tell you, the book is well edited versus what's on there. These are just the tools we use with coaching clients. It didn't have 7 layers of editing on it.
Yeah, understood. Okay, so that's freedomtoolkit.com. Include that, of course, in the show notes, so you don't have to stop driving if you're going somewhere and write that down. Now, if somebody wanted to work with you, if they wanted to join the Maui Mastermind, if they wanted to get coaching from you, if they wanted to become a client of your company, how would they do that?
Yeah, and they can go to that same website, freedomtoolkit.com. They can actually get the first 2 chapters of the book for free. And look, if any of that resonates with you, everyone has a different way they approach business. We tend to work with people who are at that middle to advanced stage level 2, who want to grow their company but value lifestyle as much as they value the money. We don't tend to have people who only want the money. It just doesn't tend to who we attract.
Yeah.
If that does appeal to somebody on the website, you can actually, if the business qualifies, we'll do a free coaching session. One of our staff members will actually sit down and do an hour to an hour and a half deep dive on your company, and you can experience what's it like to work with us, and we can get a sense to work like what's it like to work with you, and that's probably the easiest way. But
And
again,
that's
if
not
you don't
just like
resonate,
a sales call disguised as a strategy session. That's real coaching, right?
that's right. So
Awesome.
what I would say, the first hour is all about their business, and it's like, if we're working together, here's what we do in what order, and not generically, but specific to the business. And at that point, if it makes sense, we'll probably take another 10 to 20 minutes to talk through what it looks like to actually practically work with us. So, but the first hour and 10 minutes is a coaching session.
That's great. Yeah. Awesome. And I love the subtitle of your book, by the way, of the Freedom Formula, How to Succeed in Business Without Sacrificing Your Family, Health, or Life, which really is point, like just spot on with your highest values and your integrity around this is, it's not a business. It's a life that you're leading, and a business is just a piece of it. There's no this idea of work-life balance as if they're on equal footing is ridiculous.
Totally agree with that. And I appreciate that that resonated with you. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah. All right. So again, freedomtoolkit.com, and any social platforms that you're particularly active on that you want to mention as well?
Well, nowadays it's actually Facebook, which I'm laughing. If it wasn't for coronavirus, my staff would be on all these things. I'm now actually on there. It's kind of been fun. They've retrained me, which I never thought they would get me to do, but I'm on there probably 2 or 3 times a day now, answering questions or doing a Facebook live stream of some sort. So they can find us there. We have some open groups, and we have some groups just for clients, but we have some open groups as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, very good. Well, thank you, David. This was fabulous and inspiring and full of wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Stefan, thank you. I really had a lot of fun on here. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you. And now, listener, please go and check out the show notes. Go to freedomtoolkit.com, get those free resources, do all the stuff that we talked about, not necessarily all at once. Eat an elephant one bite at a time, but go out and create some value in the world and have a wonderful rest of your week.